I built my entire life believing blood is eternal and marriage is an impenetrable fortress. But when the two people you would die for are secretly digging a grave to bury you, you cannot shed a single tear. You must smile, hand them the shovels, watch them climb to the bottom, and coldly bury them alive. If you ever wondered how ruthless a cornered woman can be, this is the story you must hear until the very last second. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Juliana Walker. From the outside looking in, my life was an absolute masterclass in modern perfection, a glittering showcase of success that most people only ever read about in magazines. I lived in a sprawling, multi-level penthouse overlooking the vibrant city skyline, wrapped every single day in the quiet, undeniable luxury of imported silk sheets, custom-designed mahogany furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed my home in golden sunlight. At the very center of this meticulously curated universe was Marcus, my husband. He was the kind of man who commanded a room the second he walked through the door, armed with a devastatingly charming smile and an aura of absolute confidence. Beside us in every family portrait stood Chloe, my beautiful younger sister. She was a massive social media darling, a radiant influencer whose perfectly filtered lifestyle was worshipped by millions of devoted followers. We were the untouchable trinity. Marcus and I were the ultimate power couple, and Chloe was the glittering jewel we fiercely protected from the harsh realities of the world, or so I wholeheartedly believed. My own success was certainly not handed to me on a silver platter. I am the communications director at Etherius Dynamics, a massive global technology conglomerate that dictates industry trends. I sacrificed the entirety of my 20s and the better part of my 30s to build its foundational structure from the ground up. I happily traded peaceful nights of sleep for brutal boardroom negotiations, missed countless personal birthdays for high-stakes press conferences, and poured every ounce of my youthful energy into crafting an untouchable corporate empire. The wealth and elevated status I achieved were the hard-earned rewards of my relentless ambition. Marcus enjoyed the bountiful fruits of my labor, flawlessly playing the role of the incredibly supportive husband while comfortably pursuing his own lucrative ventures. We had absolutely everything. But as I would soon discover, a flawless facade is often the most fragile structure of all. The very first invisible cracks in my marriage did not appear with a dramatic, explosive confrontation. They crept in quietly, disguising themselves as trivial, easily dismissed changes in our daily routine. It started at our weekly Friday night dinners. Usually, the three of us would sit around our massive dining table, sharing expensive wine and laughing together until our lungs ached. But slowly, month by month, the air in that room grew thick and completely suffocating. I began to notice Marcus abruptly slipping his phone into his pocket the exact moment I entered the room, or meticulously placing it face down on the cold marble counter. When I looked at Chloe, the sweet sister who used to tell me her deepest, darkest secrets, I found her eyes constantly darting away in a panic. She would stare intently at her wine glass, her manicured nails, or the abstract painting on the wall anywhere but directly into my eyes. A heavy, unspoken tension hovered between them, a bizarre magnetic pull I could not quite understand but felt deep within my bones. My intuition, sharpened to a razor edge by years of intense corporate risk assessment, began to hum with a low-frequency warning. That vague unease fully solidified into concrete suspicion on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was gathering Marcus's tailored suits for the dry cleaner when my fingers brushed against a crisp piece of paper crumpled deep inside his breast pocket. I pulled it out and smoothed the wrinkles. It was a printed receipt for a 2-night stay at an obscenely expensive luxury resort located 3 states away. The booking explicitly stated it was for 2 guests. My heart performed a slow, painful drop, but my face remained a perfect, emotionless mask when he casually walked into the bedroom. I held up the slip of paper and asked, Marcus, what is this massive charge for the Grand Plaza? Marcus did not even blink once. He offered a smooth, rehearsed smile and replied, Oh, that? It is just an all-expenses-paid reward for my top-performing employee. He really earned it this quarter. It was far too polished, far too quick. It was a poisonous lie wrapped in soft velvet. I accepted his explanation with a slow nod, but the seed of profound doubt had already taken root, growing wildly in the dark corners of my mind. I began to mentally cross-reference his travel schedule with her online activity. A chilling, undeniable pattern quickly emerged. Every single time Marcus claimed he had an urgent business trip to Miami, Los Angeles, or Seattle, Chloe would magically announce a brand-sponsored trip to the exact same city. I meticulously scrolled through her social media feeds, analyzing the distant backgrounds of her glamorous photos, a specific palm tree, a unique hotel balcony railing, the faint reflection in her oversized sunglasses. The overlapping timelines were far too precise to be a mere coincidence. They were two parallel lines intersecting right through the very center of my sacred marriage. The definitive fracture, the exact moment the grand illusion shattered entirely, happened deep in the dead of night. It was past 2 o'clock in the morning. I woke up suddenly with a completely parched throat and slipped quietly out of our king-sized bed, intending to get a simple glass of cold water from the kitchen. The penthouse was shrouded in thick, heavy darkness. As I padded softly down the long hallway, a faint, muffled sound stopped me dead in my tracks. It was coming from Marcus's private home office. The thick oak door was slightly ajar, spilling a thin sliver of golden light onto the hardwood floor. I held my breath and stepped closer, pressing my back flat against the cold wall. Marcus was on his phone. He was not discussing corporate contracts or quarterly sales projections. He was whispering, I miss you too, baby. I cannot wait to hold you again, he murmured. The tone of his voice was deep, husky, and saturated with an intense, intoxicating affection, a tender intimacy he had not offered me in over 2 years. He spoke sweet promises into the receiver, his words dripping with a sickening devotion that utterly paralyzed my body. I did not need to hear the voice on the other end to know exactly who he was talking to. The ultimate betrayal wrapped its freezing fingers around my throat, violently choking the life out of my foolish trust. I stood there alone in the silent shadows, silently bleeding out from a fatal wound no one else could see, knowing my life would never be the same again. Any ordinary woman would have burst through that thick oak door, screaming and tearing at his clothes, demanding the truth and shattering the silence of the night with her shattered heart. But I was not an ordinary woman. I was a crisis management expert who had spent the last 15 years extinguishing catastrophic corporate fires before the media even caught a whiff of smoke. The moment I heard his whispered betrayals, the bleeding wife inside me died a swift, quiet death. In her place, a cold, calculating strategist awoke. I did not shed a single tear. I did not make a single sound. I simply retreated to the kitchen, poured my glass of cold water, drank it in one steady gulp, and went back to bed, lying perfectly still next to the man who was planning my ruin. The very next morning, the second Marcus left the penthouse for his morning run. I walked into his home office and locked the door. I bypassed his pitifully simple password, a combination of his birth year and his favorite sports team, and accessed his desktop. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the absolute precision of a seasoned surgeon. I silently installed a highly advanced, encrypted message syncing software deep into his operating system, linking his private communications directly to my secure, untraceable cloud drive. I hid the executable file within a generic system folder, ensuring neither Marcus nor any basic antivirus sweep would ever detect its presence. Every text, every email, every hidden file he thought was safely deleted or secured behind a firewall would now be instantly mirrored to my personal server. I was no longer a victim blindly stumbling in the dark. I was a predator gathering my ammunition. Over the next 48 hours, the sheer volume of data I intercepted was entirely sickening. I sat in my private office at Aetheris, sipping black coffee while reading their intimate exchanges, but the true horror waiting for me in those digital folders went far beyond a filthy, incestuous affair. As I meticulously combed through their encrypted chat logs and hidden audio notes, I uncovered a conspiracy so deeply vile it made my blood run ice cold. They were not merely satisfied with destroying my marriage and laughing behind my back. They were actively orchestrating the complete and total annihilation of my professional empire. My husband and my own flesh and blood sister were secretly colluding with Vanguard Tech, the fiercest competitor Aetheris Dynamics had ever faced in the open market. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been quietly copying the proprietary blueprints of my upcoming global communication strategy. This was the exact strategy I had spent the last 8 months designing. A multi-billion-dollar rollout that would guarantee Aetheris total market dominance for the next decade. Marcus was feeding every single detail of my intellectual property directly to Chloe. She was acting as the glamorous middleman, using her high-profile influencer meetings as a bulletproof cover to negotiate a massive, under-the-table buyout with Vanguard executives. But selling my company secrets for a hefty payday was just phase 1 of their despicable architecture of deceit. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning a document labeled Project Genesis, and the air completely left my lungs. Their ultimate endgame was a masterstroke of absolute malice. They were fabricating an intricate web of fake offshore bank accounts and forged email chains, all meticulously designed to frame me for massive commercial fraud and corporate espionage. Their plan was to plant this falsified evidence on the company's servers exactly 48 hours before the annual strategy conference. The board of directors would have absolutely no choice but to strip me of my massive shareholding, terminate my employment immediately, and throw me out of the company in total, irrevocable disgrace. And Chloe, my sweet, innocent younger sister, had written the script for the aftermath herself. In a long, gloating voice note, I played over and over again until the words were burned into my brain. She laid out her flawless performance. I cannot wait to see her stupid face when she loses absolutely everything. Chloe laughed in the recording, her voice dripping with venom. We are going to rule this city. Marcus, it is our time now. Once I was publicly ruined, facing intense federal investigation and potential prison time, she would step in to play the devastated, fiercely loyal sister trying to save the family honor. Leveraging her massive social media influence and her newly minted ties with Vanguard Tech, she planned to swoop in and position herself as the new, youthful face of the industry, effortlessly snatching my vacant position as communications director. And once the dust settled and my life was completely reduced to ashes, she and Marcus would finally announce their tragic, beautiful love story to the world, claiming they found solace in each other's arms after my devastating betrayal. The sheer audacity of their greed was almost breathtaking. They wanted my husband, my wealth, my spotless reputation, and my corporate throne. They wanted to erase Juliana Walker from existence and dance triumphantly on my grave. The double pain of losing my marriage and my family should have crushed my spirit into fine dust. Instead, it crystallized into a deadly, impenetrable silence within my mind. Every lingering drop of affection I ever held for Marcus or Chloe evaporated instantly, leaving behind a sterile void of pure, unadulterated vengeance. I was no longer dealing with family members who had simply lost their way. I was dealing with hostile combatants who wanted me utterly destroyed. I carefully closed the files and glanced at the digital clock on my desk. The Grand Strategy Announcement Conference, the exact moment they planned to detonate their bomb and destroy my entire existence, was scheduled for next Friday. I had exactly 7 days, 168 hours to completely dismantle their meticulously crafted architecture of deceit and turn their own weapons against them. They thought they were burying a naive, blindly trusting woman. They forgot they were digging a grave for the very woman who wrote the industry rulebook on destroying reputations and managing fatal crises. I closed the laptop, smoothed the invisible wrinkles on my designer skirt, and smiled to the empty room. The time for mourning was over. The time for absolute destruction had just begun. The next 5 days required a performance worthy of the highest cinematic accolades. I slipped back into the skin of the exhausted, deeply devoted wife with terrifying ease. Instead of pulling away and creating distance, I leaned in closer. I actively encouraged Chloe to visit our luxurious penthouse much more frequently, calling her almost every afternoon. I claimed that the immense, crushing pressure at the corporate office made me desperately crave the comforting warmth of family time. I wanted them entirely close to me. I needed to carefully observe the intoxicating arrogance radiating from their very pores. They would sit together on my expensive velvet sofa, casually sipping my imported vintage wine, sharing microscopic, triumphant smirks whenever they foolishly thought my attention was diverted toward the kitchen. They truly believed they were the brilliant, untouchable predators, mercilessly toying with a clueless, hopelessly overworked prey. The sheer hubris in the room was almost a tangible entity, a sickening sweetness that I inhaled deeply without ever flinching or breaking character. On a quiet Tuesday evening, exactly 3 days before the Grand Strategy Conference, I decided to aggressively test the structural integrity of their hidden nerves. I had prepared a lavish, multi-course dinner, meticulously setting the long dining table with our absolute finest silver cutlery and imported crystal glasses. Halfway through the heavy main course, I let out a long, exhausted sigh and deliberately dropped my heavy silver fork onto the delicate porcelain plate with a sharp clatter. "You both will not believe the absolute chaos happening at headquarters today," I said, slowly rubbing my temples with perfectly feigned exhaustion. Our advanced cybersecurity division picked up some incredibly severe data irregularities. The executive board is quietly launching a massive, highly classified internal investigation. They are absolutely convinced we have a high-level corporate spy systematically bleeding our proprietary strategy data directly to an external competitor. The heavy silence that instantly crashed down upon the dining room was completely deafening. For exactly 1,000th of a second, their flawlessly polished masks slipped and shattered. Marcus froze completely rigid, a small piece of steak hovering mere inches from his mouth, his knuckles turning stark white around the handle of his fork. Chloe abruptly choked on her expensive red wine, coughing violently and uncontrollably into her pristine linen napkin. They exchanged a singular, razor-sharp glance of absolute, unadulterated panic directly across the table. It was a fleeting, desperate transmission of pure terror, completely invisible to an untrained or unsuspecting eye. But to me, it was a magnificent, sweeping symphony. I quickly reached over, gently and affectionately patting Marcus on his tense arm. "Do not worry at all, my darling," I cooed softly, standing up to pour him another tall glass of iced water. "Whoever this pathetic traitor is, they are incredibly arrogant, and arrogant people always make one fatal, stupid mistake right before the very end. The internal security team will inevitably butcher them and throw them to the authorities." While I perfectly played the role of the clueless, trusting victim inside my own home, my days in the heart of the city were dedicated to forging an unstoppable weapon of absolute legal destruction. I discreetly retained the most brilliant and ruthless corporate economic crime attorney on the East Coast. We convened in a highly secure, windowless conference room within a commercial building completely disconnected from Aetherist dynamics. I did not want a sympathetic shoulder to cry on or a therapist to soothe my broken heart. I required a watertight, impenetrable legal machine. I laid out the entire horrific truth on the heavy mahogany table, demanding to know the exact microscopic legal line between simply gathering evidence as a helpless victim and crossing into illegal entrapment. I needed Vanguard tech and my treacherous family members to eagerly place their necks into a heavy noose they truly believed they had tied themselves. My attorney drafted a flawless, ironclad plan. Incredibly aggressive legal framework, ensuring that when the heavy iron hammer finally fell, neither Marcus nor Chloe would possess a single, tiny loophole to crawl through and escape prison time. With the strict legal parameters firmly established and verified, I returned to my private office and began carefully crafting the ultimate, irresistible bait. I spent an entire sleepless night completely fabricating a highly advanced, totally fictional communication infrastructure initiative called Project Obsidian. I meticulously forged complex financial projections, heavily redacted engineering schematics, and completely falsified global revenue models clearly indicating a guaranteed, explosive return of over $500 million within the first 18 months of launch. It was a corporate holy grail, an intellectual property asset so dazzlingly lucrative and revolutionary that the executives at Vanguard Tech would blindly salivate over it. I printed the thick classified dossier, aggressively stamped every single page with bright red confidential ink, and deliberately left the thick folder sitting carelessly on the very edge of my home office desk before leaving early for a fabricated breakfast meeting. I sat alone in my dark car exactly 3 blocks away, staring intently at the encrypted synchronization monitor glowing on my tablet screen. Exactly 45 minutes later, the automated system rapidly alerted me. Marcus had eagerly taken the bait. My screen perfectly mirrored his frantic, greedy actions as he rapidly scanned every single classified page of Project Obsidian, heavily compressing the massive files, and immediately transmitting them directly to a secure, hidden cloud folder shared exclusively with Chloe. By 12 o'clock noon, my advanced intercept software captured the final, spectacularly fatal sequence. Chloe, completely blinded by the dizzying promise of unprecedented wealth and corporate power, forwarded the entire fabricated dossier directly to the private email address of the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Tech. She carelessly used her own personal mobile device and firmly attached her unique digital signature to the highly illegal transaction. She had just willingly handed a massive rival corporation highly classified, albeit completely fake, corporate assets, firmly cementing an inescapable federal charge of corporate espionage and grand economic fraud. The steel jaws of the trap had successfully and violently snapped shut, permanently crushing their futures into fine, worthless dust. Late that same evening, I stood perfectly still in the center of my vast, brightly lit walk-in closet, the soft, warm lighting illuminating endless rows of exclusive designer garments. My cold reflection in the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror revealed a hardened woman completely and utterly devoid of human mercy. I slowly reached out and let my fingertips glide over the smooth fabric of a breathtaking blood-red silk gown. It was the most commanding, aggressively unapologetic dress I owned, the absolute perfect, impenetrable armor for a devastating public execution. I firmly pulled it from the heavy wooden rack, holding the vibrant crimson fabric against my body, and a slow, entirely glacial smile crept across my face. The wooden pieces were permanently locked on the chessboard. The foolish king and his greedy queen were completely surrounded with no avenue of escape, and the final, bloody checkmate was now only hours away. With exactly 48 hours remaining before the most critical event in Aetheris Dynamics history, the atmosphere inside my penthouse transformed into a theater of the absurd. Marcus and Chloe suddenly became suffocatingly attentive, wrapping me in a thick, cloying blanket of fake affection that made my stomach churn. They were desperately trying to mask their radioactive levels of anticipation, but to my razor-sharp senses, their suppressed euphoria was blinding. They moved around the apartment with a frantic, jittery energy, like 2 starving wolves who could already taste the fresh blood of their prey. Marcus would go out of his way to brew my morning coffee, gently massaging my shoulders while leaning in to whisper how incredibly proud he was of my upcoming presentation. Chloe practically lived on our sofa during those final 2 days, constantly offering to run errands and continuously praising my brilliance. The absolute sheer arrogance required to look a woman dead in the eyes, stroke her hair, and simultaneously plot her total obliteration was genuinely a marvel to witness. The zenith of their grotesque charade occurred on the evening of our second-to-last day. Marcus walked through the front door carrying a sleek black velvet box from an exclusive jeweler downtown. He approached me with a practiced, devastatingly handsome smile, the exact same smile that had completely fooled me for a decade. I know how intensely stressed you have been about the global strategy launch, he murmured softly, opening the box to reveal a breathtaking cascade of flawless diamonds. Consider this a token of my infinite appreciation for everything you do for us. It must have cost easily over $100,000. I stood perfectly still as he carefully fastened the heavy, icy stones around my neck, his warm hands lingering affectionately on my skin. He was not giving me a romantic gift. He was tossing a final, pitiful scrap of meat to a condemned prisoner before leading her to the guillotine. It was a twisted severance package to soothe whatever microscopic shred of guilt remained in his decaying conscience. I looked at our reflection in the hallway mirror, touched the diamonds resting against my collarbone, and gave him a flawlessly bright, grateful smile. It is absolutely stunning, Marcus. I will wear it on stage. I want everyone to see how deeply you love me. The sick irony of my words tasted like sweet honey on my tongue. While Marcus was playing the role of the generous, adoring husband, Chloe was busy feeding her insatiable narcissistic ego online. Sitting alone in my private office later that night, I pulled up her heavily monitored social media profile. She had just posted a highly stylized, moody photograph of herself staring thoughtfully out of a high-rise window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. The caption below it made my jaw clench. Sometimes, the universe violently clears away the old, stagnant energy to make room for a magnificent, breathtaking new chapter. Massive changes are coming. Get ready to watch me ascend, my beautiful followers. Within a mere 3 hours, the post had accumulated over 4 million interactions and hundreds of thousands of comments praising her mysterious, inspiring aura. She was practically screaming her treacherous victory from the digital rooftops, completely intoxicated by the massive delusion that she had successfully outsmarted the veteran queen of corporate communications. She truly believed the golden crown was already resting firmly upon her head. But while they were busy celebrating a victory they had not yet won, I was actively arming the nuclear warhead that would vaporize their entire existence the day before the gala. Under the guise of conducting a final, routine stage inspection, I went directly to the grand ballroom at the city center. I completely bypassed the junior staff and went straight to the lead audiovisual engineers, using my supreme, unquestionable authority as the director of communications. I demanded complete isolation in the main control booth. I handed the head technician a heavily encrypted, solid-state drive and ordered a total, unannounced override of the master projection sequence. I instructed him to lock the new sequence behind a strict biometric firewall that only I could authorize from the podium. They had absolutely no idea they had just loaded a devastating arsenal of raw, unedited truth into the main visual servers. After securing the physical display, I logged into a highly secure, untraceable virtual server I had rented under a ghost entity. I meticulously scheduled an automated, massive data dump. At the exact second, I triggered the stage presentation. This server would instantaneously blast thousands of high-priority emails containing the full, unredacted legal dossier, the explicit hotel receipts, the incriminating Vanguard tech correspondence, and the graphic audio recordings. The targets included every single member of the Aetherius Board of Directors, our top 500 majority shareholders, and over 200 elite journalists from the most ruthless financial media outlets in the country. The digital firing squad was fully loaded, aimed, and completely inescapable. The final night before the absolute destruction of my old life arrived with a heavy, suffocating silence. I lay awake in our massive king-sized bed, staring blankly up at the dark ceiling. The expensive diamond necklace was locked away in a drawer, and the digital traps were silently counting down in the dark. Beside me, Marcus was sleeping deeply and peacefully. I slowly turned my head to look at him in the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. I listened intently to the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing. The chest that rose and fell next to me belonged to a total stranger, a hostile enemy who had secretly hollowed out my entire world months ago. Discovering his treason would have caused me to weep until my lungs collapsed. But lying there on that final night, Feeling the steady, slow beat of my own heart, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No sorrow, no lingering affection, not even anger, just a cold, boundless, sterile void. The transformation was entirely complete. My own internal ruthlessness had reached total, magnificent maturity. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness wash over me, and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, completely ready to wake up and watch the world burn. The grand ballroom of the city center was a blinding cathedral of modern wealth and limitless excess. It was exactly 7 o'clock in the evening when the heavy gilded doors officially opened, unleashing a massive tidal wave of corporate elites, hungry journalists, and high society vultures into the vast space. The air inside the hall was incredibly thick, heavy with the suffocating scent of rare imported orchids and ridiculously expensive designer perfumes. Thousands of cascading crystal prisms hung gracefully from the high ceiling, fracturing the brilliant golden light and scattering it fiercely across the spotless, polished marble floor. I stepped out of the sleek black vehicle, the cool evening air kissing my skin, and the world instantly exploded into a chaotic, dizzying storm of blinding white camera flashes. I was the absolute, unquestionable center of gravity. I wore the blood-red silk gown I had meticulously chosen days ago, and it clung to my body like a coat of liquid fire. It was a stark, unapologetically violent contrast to the endless sea of monotonous black tuxedos and safe, boring pastel dresses surrounding me. Marcus stepped out right behind me, perfectly tailored and exuding that sickeningly flawless, practiced charm. He confidently placed his warm hand on the small of my back, guiding me smoothly through the screaming press line, entirely oblivious to the terrifying fact that he was proudly escorting his own executioner to the stage. We moved gracefully through the grand foyer, stopping every few feet to smile brightly for the endless cameras and exchange hollow, meaningless pleasantries with multimillionaire investors and global partners. And then, like a perfectly timed venomous snake, Chloe slithered directly into our orbit. She looked undeniably stunning in a sheer, silver-beaded dress that aggressively caught every single flash of light in the room. Her hair was arranged in careless, cascading waves that probably took a massive team of stylists 4 solid hours to perfect. She immediately rushed over, completely ignoring all basic boundaries of etiquette, and forcefully wedged herself right between Marcus and me. She threw her thin arms around my neck for a fake, highly photographed embrace, her icy cheek pressing firmly against mine. But the moment the cameras clicked, her body language shifted entirely toward him. Throughout the opening cocktail hour, I watched them closely from the absolute corner of my eye. They were practically vibrating with suppressed, deeply malicious joy. I constantly caught them exchanging rapid, highly specific glances, a secret, silent language of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Chloe would subtly brush her shimmering silver clutch against his forearm, and Marcus would respond with a microscopic, knowing nod. They were absolutely convinced their digital guillotine was perfectly primed, fully believing that in exactly 2 short hours, my entire glorious life would publicly disintegrate into dust. At precisely 8:30 in the evening, the heavy resonant chimes echoed loudly through the cavernous hall, signaling the 2,000 elite guests to take their assigned VIP seats. The massive, multi-million-dollar stage was a masterclass in aggressive corporate branding, heavily flanked by towering digital screens and illuminated by piercing, dramatic theatrical spotlights. The low, constant murmur of the massive crowd slowly died down as the main house lights dimmed entirely into pitch blackness. A single, brilliant beam of pure white light suddenly snapped down from the high ceiling, directly illuminating the sleek, clear acrylic podium. The entire massive room held its collective breath in total silence. I walked up the carpeted steps with the slow, measured, and terrifying grace of a reigning monarch stepping up to an altar of sacrifice. My heels clicked rhythmically against the solid floor, a steady, echoing heartbeat cutting through the absolute silence of the auditorium. I reached the podium, placed my hands firmly on the cool, sharp edges, and looked out over the massive, dark sea of expectant faces. In the very front row, separated from the stage by a mere 10 feet, sat Marcus and Chloe. They were sitting extremely close, shoulder to shoulder, leaning forward with intense, predatory anticipation. They were entirely ready to watch my spectacular, humiliating downfall. I stared directly down into their eyes, letting the heavy, crushing silence stretch out for 10 excruciatingly long seconds. I did not pull out the standard, corporate-approved presentation script outlining our fourth quarter global expansion metrics. Instead, I leaned intimately into the microphone, my voice echoing like cold, sharp thunder across the silent room. "Loyalty," I began, letting the heavy word hang dangerously in the cold air, "is the absolute rarest currency in the entire human experience. We build massive, impenetrable fortresses of trust around ourselves, completely surrounding our hearts with the people we foolishly believe would gladly take a bullet for us. But what happens when the absolute greatest, most destructive threat is not an invading army waiting outside the high walls? What happens when the lethal, burning poison is deliberately poured into your daily cup by the exact same familiar hands that gently stroke your face in the dark of night?" A strange, highly confused murmur began to ripple rapidly through the back rows of the massive audience. The high-powered corporate executives, who were entirely expecting a boring, predictable speech about digital market penetration, suddenly shifted very uncomfortably in their expensive seats. This was clearly not the rehearsed script. This was something raw, something highly volatile and incredibly dangerous. I absolutely did not break eye contact with my husband for even a fraction of a second. "Greed is a bottomless, starving ocean," I continued steadily, my voice rising in volume and razor-sharp intensity. "It entirely blinds people. It makes a grown man look at his wildly successful, fiercely devoted wife and decide that her brilliant empire is not enough. He must completely steal it from her hands. It makes a young, hopelessly desperate woman look at her own flesh and blood sister and decide that familial love is completely worthless compared to a stolen executive chair and a handful of dirty, highly illegal corporate payouts." Down in the brightly lit front row, the arrogant, sickening smirk violently melted right off Marcus' face. The blood completely drained from his cheeks in a matter of seconds, leaving him the terrifying color of dirty ash. His posture went completely rigid, his spine locking up. He suddenly realized the terrifying, crushing gravity of the situation. The invisible, flawless trap they thought they had so cleverly set for me was actually a massive, steel cage I had built entirely around them. I watched his panicked, wide eyes dart wildly toward the technical control booth at the very back of the hall. He frantically nudged Chloe with his sharp elbow, his fingers digging painfully and desperately into her bare arm. He gave her a frantic, terrifying nod, a clear, silent scream ordering her to trigger their fake defamation documents right now, to launch their desperate attack before I could finish my sentence. Chloe fumbled violently with her silver clutch, her hands shaking so incredibly badly she nearly dropped her expensive phone onto the floor. Right at that exact, glorious second, before her trembling, guilty fingers could even unlock her glowing screen, I smiled. It was not a polite, restrained corporate smile. It was a blinding, utterly merciless display of pure, absolute triumph. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice vibrating with a magnificent, terrifying power that commanded the entire building. "Tonight, we were supposed to unveil the glorious future of Aetherus Dynamics," I declared loudly, the sound bouncing fiercely off the high walls. But I realized that before a magnificent company can look toward a brilliant future, it must aggressively amputate the rotting, diseased flesh dragging it down into the mud. Therefore, the absolute greatest, most spectacular gift I have to offer this evening is not a new corporate strategy for our esteemed shareholders. The absolute biggest, most unforgettable gift tonight is entirely dedicated to my deeply beloved husband, Marcus, and my sweet, beautiful sister, Chloe. Please, everyone, direct your attention to the main screens. The massive LED screens towering behind me did not illuminate with the familiar blue corporate logo of Etherius Dynamics. Instead, they violently flared into a stark, blinding white, displaying a giant, pulsating audio waveform. The crisp, digitally enhanced recording of Marcus and Chloe, eagerly negotiating the sale of my proprietary strategy, echoed like a bomb blast through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. The audience heard every single greedy whisper, every treacherous detail of their deal with Vanguard Tech, laid entirely bare for 2,000 industry leaders to digest. Before the shock could even fully settle over the paralyzed crowd, the audio abruptly cut, and the visual onslaught began. The screens fractured into dozens of high-resolution windows, massive, undeniable projections of their vile, incestuous text messages, unredacted luxury hotel receipts from 3 states away, and highly explicit, deeply intimate photographs flooded the ballroom. The absolute filth of their secret lives was magnified to 20 feet tall, glaring down at the high society elite. The deafening silence of the room was instantly shattered by the frantic, explosive clicking of over 200 professional press cameras. The journalists went absolutely feral, shouting questions and pushing against the velvet ropes to capture the most scandalous corporate meltdown of the century. Simultaneously, a synchronized wave of electronic chimes and aggressive vibrations swept through the audience. Every single executive, major shareholder, and media representative simultaneously received the automated data dump I had scheduled. But more importantly, that exact same encrypted email, containing the airtight legal dossier of their multi-million-dollar economic fraud and corporate espionage, was delivered directly to the secure mobile devices of the Federal Economic Police Force. I had personally tipped them off 48 hours in advance, and they were already stacked in the lobby, waiting for my signal. Down in the front row, the destruction was absolute. Chloe collapsed from her chair onto the hard marble floor, her expensive silver dress tangling around her trembling legs. She let out a guttural, pathetic wailing noise, wildly grabbing at the ankles of the disgusted investors seated near her. "It is a lie. She fabricated all of it. Please, you have to believe me," she screamed hysterically, heavy streaks of black mascara ruining her perfectly sculpted face. But the executives physically recoiled from her as if she were carrying a deadly plague. The hundreds of smartphones pointed directly at her sobbing face guaranteed that her glittering, carefully curated persona as an innocent social media darling was permanently shattered into millions of worthless pieces. Her brand, her sponsors, her entire fake reality evaporated in less than 60 seconds. Marcus did not cry. His profound, sickening arrogance violently mutated into a blind, feral rage. The veins in his neck bulged as he let out a furious roar. Lunging forward and scrambling frantically up the stage steps, he intended to physically tear me away from the podium, his fists clenched tight, his eyes completely bloodshot. "I will kill you," he bellowed, charging at me with terrifying speed. But I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before his expensive leather shoes could even cross the midpoint of the stage, 4 massive men dressed in sharp black suits materialized from the shadows. They were the elite, highly specialized private security contractors I had hired weeks ago for this exact moment. They moved with absolute, brutal efficiency. 2 guards violently slammed Marcus down onto the hard acrylic floor, painfully twisting his arms securely behind his back, while a third pressed a heavy boot firmly between his shoulder blades. They dragged him forcefully across the stage and forced him down onto his knees. Planting him exactly at my feet, he thrashed and spat like a rabid animal, looking up at me with absolute, murderous hatred, completely powerless under the crushing weight of his captors. I looked down at the pathetic, broken man who had once been my entire world. My face remained a completely emotionless mask of cold, unyielding power. I did not offer him a single word of closure. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. 24 uniformed officers from the Federal Economic Crimes Division marched down the center aisle, their heavy boots echoing over the chaotic screaming of the crowd. They ascended the stage, firmly took custody of Marcus and aggressively clicked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Another squad pulled a hysterically sobbing Chloe up from the floor, dragging her out alongside her lover. They were paraded directly through the center of the room, completely blinded by a ferocious storm of camera flashes, their careers, their wealth, and their freedom permanently annihilated. The crowd parted for me in total, reverent silence as I calmly stepped down from the podium. Powerful billionaires and cutthroat executives stared at me with a potent mixture of absolute awe and raw, primal fear. I walked out of the ballroom, my head held incredibly high, and stepped into the cool night air where my private black car was waiting. I slid into the leather back seat, slowly slipped the heavy diamond wedding ring off my left hand, and tossed it carelessly into the small trash bin built into the door console. As the engine purred and the car pulled away from the chaotic scene, I looked out the tinted window at the beautiful, glowing city skyline. A slow, genuinely warm smile spread across my face. The heavy chains were finally broken, and I was entirely ready to conquer a magnificent, brilliantly unwritten new life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.